To understand Apple, you have to forget about the iPhone, forget the clean white stores, forget the $3 trillion valuation. We have to go back to the dirt. We have to go back to a time when Silicon Valley was not filled with billionaires, it was filled with orchards, apricots, prunes, and rebels. Our story begins with a trauma, 1955. San Francisco. A baby boy is born. His father is a Syrian immigrant named Jandali. His mother is an American graduate student. They are young, they are scared. Her father refuses to let her marry an Arab. So they give the baby away. Adoption. The baby is handed to a working-class couple, Paul and Clara Jobs. They name him Steve. Steve Jobs grows up knowing he was adopted, knowing he was abandoned. Later in life, people would ask him about this. They would say, "Did you feel rejected?" He would get angry. He would scream, "No, Paul and Clara are my parents, 1000%. But deep down, in the dark corners of his psychology, there was a void, a need to control, a need to prove that he was special, that he was chosen. This abandonment issue is the engine that will drive Apple. It is the fuel for his perfectionism. Because if everything you make is perfect, nobody can reject you again. Now, cut to a different house. Meet Steve Wozniak. Everyone calls him the Woz. Woz is the opposite of Jobs. He is pure. He is sweet. He is socially awkward. He doesn't care about money. He doesn't care about power. He only cares about one thing: electronics. Woz was a Mozart of engineering. While other kids were playing baseball, Woz was redesigning mini-computers on pieces of paper, just for fun. He could look at a microchip and see the electricity flowing like water in a river. He wanted to build things to help people, to make them smile. These two timelines collide in 1971. They are introduced by a mutual friend. Jobs is 16, Woz is 21. On paper, they shouldn't be friends. Jobs is a hippie who walks barefoot and eats only apples. Woz is a nerd who loves pranks. But they bond over one thing: music. Specifically, Bob Dylan and pranks. Their first joint project wasn't a computer. It was a weapon, a digital weapon to attack the giant AT&T telephone monopoly. Woz read an article about phone phreaks, hackers who could trick the phone system. He learned that if you played a specific sound, a whistle at 2,600 hertz, the phone network thought you were an operator. It opened the line. You could call anywhere in the world. For free, Woz built a device, the Blue Box. It was magic. He used it to call the Vatican. He pretended to be Henry Kissinger. He tried to wake up the Pope. It didn't work, but it was close. Woz did it for the laugh. But Steve Jobs? Jobs looked at the Blue Box and his eyes lit up. He didn't see a prank. He saw a product. He told Woz, "We can sell this." They went dorm to dorm at Berkeley University, knocking on doors. "Hey, do you want to make free calls?" They sold them for $150. They were criminals. This was a felony. But it taught Jobs a lesson that changed history. He realized that he and Woz, two broke kids, could build a tiny device that could defeat a billion-dollar corporation. Jobs later said if there had been no Blue Box, there would have been no Apple. But before Apple, there was Atari, 1974. Jobs gets a job at the video game company Atari. He is a nightmare employee. He refuses to shower. He smells like sweat and fruit. He calls his coworkers idiots. The boss has to move him to the night shift, just so nobody has to smell him. One night, the boss asks Jobs to build a version of the game Pong for a single player, a game called Breakout. He offers a bonus. "Do it in 4 days, and I'll give you $5,000. Jobs can't code. Not really. So he calls Woz. "Woz, I need you. Can you help me design this game? I'll give you half the money." Woz doesn't sleep for 4 days. He designs the game on a breadboard. It is a masterpiece of efficiency. He finishes it. Jobs gets the $5,000. He goes to Woz and says, "Hey, we got paid. The boss gave us $700. Here is your half, $350. Jobs kept the rest. He lied to his best friend. He stole from his partner. Woz didn't find out the truth for years. When he did, he cried. This moment defines the Apple dynamic forever. Woz is the genius who does the work. Jobs is the visionary who takes the money and the credit. It was cruel, but it was effective. The year is 1975. The world is changing, the Vietnam War is ending, the microchip revolution is beginning. In a garage in Menlo Park, a group of nerds are meeting every Wednesday night. They call themselves the Homebrew Computer Club. They are hobbyists. They solder chips. They talk about the revolution. Wozniak is there. He is inspired. He decides to build a computer, not to sell, just to show off to his friends at the club. He sits in his cubicle at Hewlett-Packard, HP, working at night, drinking cream soda. He connects a keyboard to a TV screen. He types a letter on the keyboard. And, blink, the letter appears on the screen. Today, this sounds stupid. In 1975, this was Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods. Before this, computers were giant machines with flashing lights. You used punch cards. Wozniak made a computer that acted like a typewriter. He was the first person in history to type a character and see it on a screen in front of him. He showed it to Jobs. Jobs looked at the messy wires. He looked at the TV. And the reality distortion field turned on. "Woz," he said, "this is it." Woz said, "I'll give the schematics to the club members for free." Jobs said, "No. We are going to sell it." "But we have no money," Woz said. "We will find it," Jobs replied. They needed capital. They had nothing, so they made sacrifices. The founder's sacrifice. Woz sold his most prized possession, an HP 65 scientific calculator. It was the iPhone of its day. He sold it for $500. Jobs sold his car, a Volkswagen microbus. He sold it for $500. But the engine was broken, so the buyer only paid half. They had a pile of cash. They needed a name. Jobs was working on an apple orchard in Oregon. He was on one of his strict fruit diets. He came back and said, "I have a name. Apple Computer." Woz said, "What about Apple Records? The Beatles will sue us." Jobs said, "Apple is friendly. Apple is simple. And, most importantly, it comes before Atari in the phone book." That was it, pure marketing logic. But wait, did you know there was a third founder? Everyone knows Stephen Woz. But there was a man named Ronald Wayne. He was older. He was 41. He worked at Atari. Jobs brought him in to be the adult, to handle the paperwork. Wayne drew the first logo. It wasn't a simple apple. It was a complex drawing of Isaac Newton sitting under a tree. They split the company. Jobs, 45%. Woz, 45%. Wayne, 10%. Remember that 10%? They got their first order, a local computer store called the Byte Shop. The owner, Paul Terrell, said, "I'll take 50 computers, but I want them fully assembled." Jobs said, "Done." He ran back to the garage. "Woos, we have an order, 50 units, $25,000. But they didn't have the parts. Jobs went to the parts supplier. He used the purchase order from the Byte Shop as credit. He talked his way into getting the parts on loan. 30 days net. He was gambling with money he didn't have. Ronald Wayne watched this chaos. He saw Jobs spending money like a maniac. He saw the debts piling up. He thought, if this goes wrong, the bank will come for my house. These kids have nothing to lose. I have everything to lose. He panicked. 12 days after the company was founded, Ronald Wayne quit. He sold his 10% stake back to Jobs and Woz for $800. If he had kept it, today that 10% would be worth $300 billion. It is the most expensive mistake in the history of capitalism. But Wayne later said, "I don't regret it. I would have died of a heart attack working with Steve Jobs." So Wayne left. It was just the two Steves in the garage. Jobs' father, Paul, cleared out his workspace. He built a wooden fence to divide the laundry room from the factory. They worked day and night. Jobs' sister plugged chips into the boards while watching TV. The house was full of boxes. It was hot. It smelled of solder and pizza. They finished the 50 computers. They delivered them to the Byte Shop. The owner looked at them. They were just circuit boards. No case, no keyboard, no screen. "What is this?" he asked. "I wanted computers." Jobs stared him down. "This is the computer. The user can add the case." He convinced him. The owner paid. Now they had to sell the rest to the public. They put an ad in a magazine. They needed a price. Wozniak, being a math nerd, liked repeating digits. He liked the aesthetic of them. He said, "Let's sell it for $666.66. Jobs agreed. They released the Apple I for the price of the devil. Conspiracy theorists go crazy about this today. But for them, it was just a joke. The Apple, I didn't change the world. It sold maybe 200 units. But it proved something. It proved they could do it. But Jobs knew. The Apple, I was just a hobby kit for nerds. He wanted something else. He wanted a computer for everyone. He wanted a computer that looked like a kitchen appliance. He wanted the Apple II. And to build that, they needed millions. And to get millions, Steve Jobs would have to wash his feet, put on a suit, and sell his soul to the venture capitalists. We left our heroes in a garage, Jobs and Woz. They have a circuit board. They have a dream. But they have zero money. And in Silicon Valley, dreams without money are just hallucinations. Jobs goes hunting for cash. He walks into the offices of venture capitalists. Picture this. The investors are men in gray suits. They smoke cigars. They talk about PE ratios. Steve Jobs walks in wearing sandals or barefoot. He has long, greasy hair. He stares at them intensely. Most of them kick him out within 5 minutes. Don Valentine, a legend of Sequoia Capital, visited the garage. He looked at Jobs and told Wozniak, "Why don't you get a new partner? This guy looks like a human hurricane." But then the miracle happens. Enter Mike Markkula. Markkula was different. He was a retired engineer from Intel. He was 33 years old, already a millionaire, and bored. He visited the garage. He didn't look at the dirty hair. He looked at the machine. He saw Wozniak's genius. And he saw Jobs' fire. He sat them down and said, "I'm in." He wrote a personal check for $250,000. That is equal to $1.5 million today. He became the third partner, the adult supervision. But Markkula gave Jobs something more valuable than money. He gave him a philosophy. He wrote a one-page paper called The Apple Marketing Philosophy. It had 3 points. Point 1, empathy. We will truly understand their needs better than any other company. Point 2, focus. We will eliminate all the unimportant opportunities. Point 3, impute. This is a weird word, impute. It means people judge a book by its cover. Markkula told Jobs, "We might have the best computer in the world, but if we put it in a sloppy box, people will think it is sloppy. If we present it in a beautiful way, people will impute quality." This moment right here is why your iPhone box feels so good to open. It is why Apple stores look like temples. Steve Jobs took this lesson and turned it into a religion. With the money, they built the Apple II. This was Wozniak's masterpiece. It had color, it had sound, it had paddles for games. But Jobs obsessed over the case. Every other computer in 1977 looked like military equipment, gray metal, exposed screws, ugly. Jobs said, "No, it must look like a kitchen appliance. It should sit next to the flower vase." He wanted plastic. He wanted a specific shade of beige. He spent days arguing about the curve of the corners. He wanted no visible screws. The engineers hated him. "Who cares about the screws on the bottom?" Jobs said. "I care." April 1977, the West Coast Computer Fair. This was the big debut, the CES of the 70s. Jobs wanted to dominate. But they were still a tiny company. So Jobs pulled a classic con. He rented the booth right at the front entrance. He spent thousands on a backlit plexiglass display, very expensive, and he stacked piles of Apple II boxes in the booth. Hundreds of boxes. It looked like a massive inventory. But the boxes were empty. It was theater. When the doors opened, thousands of nerds flooded in. They saw the slick, beige plastic Apple II running a color display of Breakout. It was like seeing a spaceship. Apple stole the show. Orders poured in. From that day on, the graph only went up. Vertical. By 1980, Apple was a monster. They had thousands of employees. They decided to go public, IPO. December 12, 1980. It was the biggest IPO since Ford Motor Company in 1956. Overnight. Literally overnight. 300 people at Apple became millionaires. Steve Jobs was 25 years old. His net worth hit $217 million. Imagine that. Yesterday, you were a dirty hippie. Today, you are richer than kings. But money changes people. Or rather, it reveals who they really are. Jobs refused to give stock options to some of the early garage employees, specifically Daniel Kaka, his travel buddy to India. Wozniak, the sweet soul, saw this. Wozniak gave away millions of dollars of his own stock to the lower-level engineers. He started the Woz plan. He said, "I have enough. I want my friends to buy houses." Jobs kept every cent. He said, "I gave them a job, that's enough." The brotherhood was cracking. Woz was the heart. Jobs was the ego. And the ego was about to get bruised. Because while the Apple II was selling like crazy, Jobs hated it. Why? Because it was Wozniak's machine. Jobs wanted a machine that was his. He looked at the next projects. The Apple III, a disaster. The Lisa. He wanted to lead the Lisa team. He wanted to redefine computing again, but he needed inspiration. And he found it in a research lab 30 miles away, a place called Xerox PARC. We have to pause and talk about Xerox. In 1979, Xerox was a boring company that made photocopiers. But they had a secret division in Palo Alto called PARC, Palo Alto Research Center. They hired the smartest scientists in the world and told them, "Invent the future." And they did. These guys invented everything. Ethernet, the internet cables, laser printing, object-oriented programming, and the GUI, graphical user interface. Before this, computers were text. A black screen. Green letters. You had to type commands. Run, load, print. The guys at Xerox invented Windows. They invented the mouse. You could point and click. But the executives at Xerox headquarters in New York were idiots. They didn't get it. They said, "Nice toy, but can it make photocopies?" Steve Jobs heard rumors about this magic. He made a deal. "I will let Xerox invest $1 million in Apple stock. In exchange, you let me look inside your lab." Xerox agreed. It was like letting a wolf into the henhouse in exchange for a few eggs. December 1979. Jobs walks into PARC with his engineers. Adele Goldberg, one of the Xerox researchers, tried to stop it. She told her bosses, "You are giving away the kitchen sink. Do not let this guy in!" But the bosses ordered her to show him the demo. She showed him the mouse. She moved the cursor. She opened a window. Jobs went crazy. He started jumping around the room, screaming, "Why aren't you doing anything with this? This is the greatest thing I've ever seen. This is it! This is the future!" He left the meeting vibrating with energy. He drove back to Apple and told his team, "Forget everything. The tech screen is dead. We are doing that." He ordered them to copy the mouse. But make it cheaper, make it better. Was it theft? Maybe. Jobs later quoted Picasso, "Good artists copy, great artists steal." He admitted it. He was proud of it. Jobs tried to implement this new technology into the Lisa computer. He named it Lisa after his daughter, Lisa Brennan. At the time, he was denying paternity. He told Time magazine 28% of the male population of the U.S. could be the father. He was cruel. Yet, he named the computer after her. The engineers asked, "What does Lisa stand for?" He made up an acronym, Local Integrated System Architecture. Years later, he admitted, "It was obviously named after my daughter." But Jobs was out of control. He was managing the Lisa project like a tyrant. He would call engineers at 2 a.m. He would tell them their work was shit. The board of directors and Mike Markkula had enough. They realized Jobs was toxic. He was destroying the team morale. So, in a shocking move, they reorganized the company. They kicked Steve Jobs off the Lisa team. The founder, the chairman, kicked off his own project. They basically said, "Steve, go become a figurehead. Go cut ribbons. Let the adults work." Jobs was humiliated. He retreated to a small office. He looked for a new weapon. He found a tiny, secret project called Macintosh. It was started by a brilliant interface expert named Jeff Raskin. Raskin wanted to build a cheap, easy-to-use appliance computer. He named it after his favorite Apple, the Macintosh. Jobs looked at it. He liked the idea. But he hated Raskin's vision. Raskin wanted it to be cheap, $1,000. Jobs wanted it to be insanely great. So Jobs did a coup. He slowly took over the team. He bullied Raskin. He moved the Macintosh team to a separate building. the Texaco Towers. He created a culture of rebellion. He told the team, "It is better to be a pirate than to join the Navy." They literally sewed a pirate flag, black fabric, a white skull and crossbones. But the skull had the colorful Apple logo as an eye patch. They hoisted it on the roof of the building. The rest of the Apple employees looked at it with envy and fear. Jobs created an us versus them war inside his own company. "The Lisa team are bozos," he said. "We are the artists." The Macintosh team was a cult. They worked 90 hours a week. They wore t-shirts that said 90 hours a week and loving it. Jobs had a unique management style. It was called the reality distortion field. One day, an engineer named Larry Kenyon complained that the Mac took too long to boot up. Jobs looked at him and said, "If saving 10 seconds would save a person's life, could you do it?" Larry said, "Well, maybe." Jobs went to the whiteboard. "If 5 million people use the Mac and it takes 10 seconds extra to turn on, that is 50 million seconds a day. That is 100 lifetimes. If you don't fix this, you are killing 100 people a year." Larry Kenyon stared at him. A few weeks later, he made the Mac boot up 28 seconds faster. Jobs could make you do the impossible by making you feel like a hero or by making you feel like garbage. But Jobs needed a partner. He needed a CEO. He knew he was too young, too crazy to run the business side. He wanted the best marketing guy in America. He set his sights on John Scully, the CEO of Pepsi. Scully was a legend. He invented the Pepsi Challenge. Jobs flew him to California. He wooed him. Scully was hesitant. He was running a Fortune 500 company. Why join a chaotic computer startup? They were standing on a balcony in New York looking at Central Park. Scully was about to say no. Jobs got in his face. He stared deep into his soul, and he dropped the bomb. "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life? Or do you want to come with me and change the world?" It was a punch to the gut. Scully accepted. It was the start of the most famous and most tragic partnership in business history. Jobs thought he found a father figure. Scully thought he found a visionary genius. They were happy. But the Macintosh launch was approaching, and the cracks were already starting to form. The year is 1984. George Orwell wrote a book about this year. He predicted a dark future where Big Brother watches everyone. Steve Jobs read that book, and he saw a villain. IBM. IBM was the Big Brother. They were Big Blue. They controlled the computer world. They were boring, corporate, and evil. Jobs wanted to position Apple as the rebel, the only force that could stop IBM. He wanted to announce the Macintosh not just as a product, but as a revolution. He needed a commercial, but not a normal commercial. He wanted a piece of art. He hired Ridley Scott, the director of Blade Runner and Alien. They filmed it in London. The set looked like a dystopian nightmare. Gray, bald men marching in lines. These weren't actors. They were real London skinheads. They were scary. In the ad, a woman in colorful shorts runs in, chased by police. She spins a giant sledgehammer and throws it at the screen of Big Brother. Explosion. Then the text. On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984. Jobs showed the ad to the Apple board of directors. He was excited. The board hated it. Mike Markula put his head in his hands. Scully looked terrified. They said, "This is the worst commercial we have ever seen. It doesn't even show the computer. Kill it." They ordered the marketing team to sell the airtime, to cancel the slot at the Super Bowl. But Steve Jobs and the marketing genius Lee Clow disobeyed the order. They only sold 30 seconds. They kept the main 60-second slot. Steve Wozniak heard about the trouble. He loved the ad so much he offered to pay $400,000 of his own money to air it. He didn't have to. The ad aired. January 22nd, 1984, Super Bowl 18. It aired once, and the world stopped. News stations played it on the news for free. It was discussed in coffee shops. It is widely considered the greatest commercial in the history of advertising. Jobs had won the media war. 2 days later, the launch event, the Flint Center. 600 people. Steve Jobs walks on stage. He is wearing a bow tie. He looks nervous, but proud. He walks over to a bag on a table. He pulls out the Macintosh. It is small. It is beige. It smiles at you. He inserts a floppy disk. And then the computer speaks. A synthesized voice says, "Hello, I am Macintosh. It sure is great to get out of that bag." The crowd screams. People are crying. It was religious. Jobs stood there, soaking in the applause. He looked like a god. Apple stock soared. The press called him a messiah. Scully and Jobs were on the cover of magazines together. The dynamic duo. Everything was perfect. But then the reality set in, the morning after. The Macintosh was beautiful, but it had a secret. It was kind of useless. It was painfully slow. It had very little memory, 128K. It had no hard drive. You had to swap floppy disks constantly. It was like a DJ set just to save a document. And worst of all, there was no software, no games, no spreadsheets. And it was expensive. $495. By the end of 1984, sales fell off a cliff. Warehouses were filling up with unsold Macs. The Lisa was dead. The Apple III was dead. The Mac was dying. The only thing making money was the old Apple II, the machine Woz built, the machine Jobs hated. The stress inside the company became toxic. Jobs started looking for someone to blame. He didn't look in the mirror. He looked at John Scully. He started telling people, "Scully is an idiot. He doesn't get it. He is a bozo." Scully heard this. Scully was the CEO. He was the boss. He tried to be nice. But Jobs was undermining him at every turn. Jobs would hold meetings at midnight. He would change plans without telling Scully. It was a power struggle. Two stags locking horns on the edge of a cliff. One of them had to fall. The atmosphere at Apple is poisonous. Steve Jobs is 30 years old. He is behaving like a spoiled child. He demands to lower the price of the Macintosh. Scully says, "No, we need the profit margin to pay for your expensive marketing." Jobs screams. He insults Scully in front of the staff. He calls him a clueless bureaucrat. Jobs decides to launch a coup, a mutiny. He creates a secret plan. Scully is scheduled to go on a business trip to China. Jobs plans to call an emergency board meeting while Scully is on the plane. He plans to fire Scully and take control of the company. It was a Game of Thrones move. But there was a spy. Jean-Louis Gasset, the head of Apple France. Jobs trusted him. He told him the plan. Gasset thought Jobs was dangerous. He went straight to Scully. "John," he said, "don't go to China. If you leave, you won't have a job when you come back. Steve is coming for you." Scully was furious. He canceled his trip. The next morning, he walked into the executive staff meeting. Steve Jobs was there. Scully looked at him and said, "I know what you are planning. We are going to settle this. Right now." He turned to the room. The top executives of Apple. "I want you to vote," Scully said. "It's me or Steve. Who do you trust to run this company?" Silence. The executives looked at their shoes. They loved Steve's vision. But they hated working for him. He was abusive. He was chaotic. One by one, they spoke. "I'm with John. I'm with John. John." Steve Jobs sat there, stunned. His own team, his pirates. They chose the Pepsi guy. Jobs stormed out of the room. He ran to his office. He cried. But it wasn't over. Jobs appealed to the board of directors. The ultimate power. He thought Mike Markula, the man who discovered him, would save him. A few weeks later. The final showdown. The board meeting. Scully laid out the facts. "We are losing money. Steve is unmanageable. I cannot run this company if he is here." The board looked at Steve. They asked him to step down from the Macintosh division. They didn't fire him from the company. He was still the chairman. But they took away his power. They moved his office. They moved him to a small, empty building on the edge of the campus, a building nicknamed Siberia. His phone stopped ringing. His secretary stopped getting calls. He had no projects, no team, no purpose. He would drive to work, sit in his empty office, look at the wall, and drive home. He was a ghost. This went on for months. The humiliation was unbearable. He was the face of Apple. But inside, he was nobody. September 1985. Jobs makes a decision. He drives to the house of Alan Kay, a famous computer scientist. He walks in the garden. He is crying. He says, "I've lost it. I've lost my baby." But then, the fire returns. He realizes he is only 30. He is rich. He decides he will not fade away. He will build something new. Something to kill Apple. He writes a resignation letter. It is short. It is cold. He hands it to Mike Markula. And then, he does something dramatic. He sells his Apple stock. He owns 6.5 million shares. He sold them all. In anger. In spite. If I'm not running the company, I don't want to profit from it. He kept one single share. Just one. Why? So he could still receive the annual financial report in the mail. So he could watch them fail. He walked out of 20,525 Mariani Avenue. He got into his car. The era of the garage was over. The era of the suit had begun. Apple was now a normal company. Safe, boring, profitable, for now. But they had just cut out their own heart. Steve Jobs went home. He sat on the floor of his unfurnished mansion. He turned on his stereo. He played Bob Dylan. The times they are a-changin', and he started to sketch a new computer, a cube, a black cube. He would call it Next, and he vowed, one day he would return, and he would make them pay. So Steve Jobs is in exile. He is sitting in his empty mansion. He is angry, but he has $100 million. He decides to build the perfect computer, a computer that represents his soul. He calls it Next. He gathers a team of loyalists. He tells them, Apple was just the practice run. This is the real thing. His obsession reached a new level of madness. He decided the computer would be a cube, a perfect 1 foot by 1 foot cube, black, magnesium. The engineers said, Steve, making a perfect magnesium cube is impossible. The molds cost $650,000. Jobs said, do it. He wanted the inside of the computer to be painted matte black. But Steve, nobody will ever see the inside. I will know, he said. He built a factory in Fremont. He ordered the walls to be painted white. He ordered the robots to be painted white. If he saw a speck of dust on the floor, he would scrub it himself. He hired Paul Rand, the greatest logo designer in history. He designed IBM and UPS. Jobs asked for options. Rand slammed his fist on the table. I will solve your problem for you, and you will pay me $100,000. I do not do options. If you want options, go talk to someone else. Jobs loved this arrogance. He paid the check. Next, he launched in 1988. It was beautiful. It was a piece of art, but it cost $500, $10,000 with the printer. Nobody bought it. Universities couldn't afford it. Students couldn't afford it. It was a commercial disaster. Jobs was burning money. His fortune was melting. But while Next was failing, Jobs made a side bet. He found a computer graphics division owned by George Lucas. Lucas was getting divorced and needed cash. Jobs bought the division for $5 million. He named it Pixar. At first, Jobs tried to sell Pixar computers, specialized hardware for hospitals. That failed too. Pixar was losing money every month. Jobs was writing personal checks to cover the payroll. He was terrified. He was looking at bankruptcy. Am I a fraud? He thought. Was Apple just luck? But inside Pixar, there was a quiet animator named John Lasseter. Lasseter believed that computers could tell stories. He made a short film called Tin Toy. It won an Oscar. Jobs noticed. He shifted the company's focus. Forget the hardware. Let's make movies. They signed a deal with Disney to make the first fully computer-animated movie. Toy Story. It was hell. Disney executives hated the script. They tried to shut it down. Woody was too mean. But Jobs fought them. He protected the artists. For the first time in his life, Steve Jobs learned patience. He couldn't scream at a movie to make it render faster. He had to wait. November 1995, Toy Story is released. It opens with the Clouds wallpaper. You've got a friend in me. The world fell in love. It was the highest-grossing film of the year. But Jobs did something risky. He took Pixar public, IPO, exactly 1 week after the movie opened. It was a gamble. If the movie flopped, he would be ruined. The movie soared. The stock soared. Overnight, Steve Jobs' stake in Pixar was worth $1.2 billion. He was back. The boy who was kicked out of Apple was now a billionaire media mogul. And suddenly, he looked at Next again. The hardware was a failure. But the software, the operating system, was brilliant. And he knew someone who desperately needed software. His old flame, Apple. While Jobs was becoming a movie tycoon, Apple was slowly dying. John Sculley, the Pepsi guy, had increased profits for a few years, but he had no vision. He launched too many products. Go to a store in 1993. You would see the Macintosh Performa, the Quadra, the Centris, the LC, the PowerBook. There were 50 different models. Nobody knew the difference. Why does the Performa 475 cost $10 more than the 476? Customers were confused, and confused customers don't buy. And then the monster arrived, Microsoft. For years, Macintosh was better than Windows. Windows was a joke. It was ugly. But Bill Gates was relentless. August 24, 1995. Microsoft launches Windows 95. It was a cultural event. They paid the Rolling Stones millions to use the song Start Me Up. They lit up the Empire State Building with the Windows logo. People lined up at midnight to buy software. Windows 95 was good enough. It had a start button, it had Windows, it had color, and it ran on cheap PCs. Why buy a Mac for $2,000 when you can buy a Windows PC for $1,000? Apple's market share collapsed from 15% to 10% to 4%. It was a bloodbath. The Apple board panicked. They fired John Sculley. They hired a German executive named Michael Spindler. They called him the Diesel. He worked hard, but he had zero charisma. He failed. They fired him. They hired Gil Amelio. Amelio was a semiconductor expert. He was smart, but he was boring. He famously said, "Apple is like a ship with a hole in the bottom. My job is to fix the ship, not to steer it." But the ship was sinking fast. Apple lost $1 billion in 1996. The press was brutal. Wired magazine put an Apple logo wrapped in barbed wire on the cover. The headline was, "Pray." Everyone thought Apple was dead. Sun Microsystems tried to buy them for pennies. Oracle's tried to buy them. Michael Dell said, "I'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders." But the biggest problem was the operating system. Mac OS was old. It crashed constantly. It couldn't do multitasking. Apple tried to build a new one called Copeland. It was a disaster. The code was a mess. They worked on it for years, and it never worked. Gil Amelio realized, "We can't build it, we have to buy it." They looked at the market. There were two options. Option A, BOS. Created by Jean-Louis Gasset, the guy who betrayed Jobs. It was fast and modern. Option B, Next. Created by the exile, Steve Jobs. Gasset was arrogant. He demanded an insane price. He thought Apple had no choice. But Steve Jobs? Jobs smelled blood in the water. He convinced Amelio to let him present Next. December 1996. Jobs walks into the Apple boardroom. It has been 11 years. He is wearing a suit. He is charming. He is humble. He runs circles around the executives. He shows them the next software. It is light years ahead. Gil Amelio thinks, "Perfect. We buy Next. I stay as CEO. Steve Jobs becomes a consultant. He will be my mascot." Gil Amelio was a fool. Apple bought Next for $429 million. Steve Jobs was coming home. But he wasn't coming to be a mascot. He was coming to be the executioner. The Trojan horse was inside the gates. The moment Jobs arrived, he started his shadow campaign. He placed his Next people in key positions. He secretly met with the board of directors. He whispered in their ears, "Amelio is a disaster. The stock is crashing. He doesn't know what he's doing." He called his billionaire friend Larry Ellison. "Larry," he said, "I think I can save it." July 1997. Gil Amelio is on vacation. Steve Jobs calls the board. "It's time." The board fires Amelio. They ask Jobs to be the CEO. Jobs plays hard to get. "I don't know. I have Pixar." "I'm busy." They beg him. "Okay," he says. "I will be the interim CEO. the ICEO, just for 90 days, just to help. He lied. He took the keys, and the first thing he did? He walked into a room full of product managers, looked at their 50 different computers, and screamed, "These products suck! There is no sex in them!" The dictator had returned. August 1997. Steve Jobs is back. He sits in the CEO's chair, but the chair is burning. The CFO looks at him and says, "Steve, we have a problem. We have 90 days of cash left. In 3 months, we cannot pay the employees. We are bankrupt." Jobs looks at the numbers. It is a disaster. He needs money. Fast. He needs a lifeline. But who has $150 million to spare? Jobs swallows his pride. He picks up the phone. He dials the number of the man he hates. The man he called tasteless. The man who copied his Mac. Bill Gates. Jobs says, "Bill, we need to end the war. The patent lawsuits are killing us both. I need an investment." Bill Gates agrees. Why? Because if Apple dies, Microsoft becomes a monopoly. The government would split Microsoft up. Bill Gates needed Apple to survive just enough to keep the regulators away. So they make a deal. August 6th, 1997, Macworld, Boston. The crowd is full of Apple fanatics. They hate Microsoft. They treat Bill Gates like Voldemort. Steve Jobs walks on stage. He announces the partnership. Microsoft will invest $150 million in Apple. The crowd gasps. Then they boo. Boos. At an Apple event. And then the worst moment happens. A giant screen turns on behind Steve Jobs. A massive live video feed of Bill Gates appears. His face is 50 feet tall, looking down on tiny Steve Jobs. It looked exactly like the Big Brother from the 1984 commercial. The irony was painful. Jobs stood there, looking uncomfortable. He told the crowd, "We have to let go of the notion that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose." It was the deal with the devil, but that check, that $150 million, saved the company. Now that the bank account was full, Jobs became the butcher. He looked at the product line. Apple was selling 15 different versions of the Macintosh. Printers, scanners, PDAs, even a digital camera, the QuickTake. Jobs asked the product managers, "Which one do I tell my friends to buy?" They couldn't answer. Jobs exploded. "Stop!" he screamed. "This is crazy!" He went to a whiteboard. He drew a simple cross, a grid with 4 squares. He wrote on top, Consumer and Pro. He wrote on the side, Desktop and Portable. He turned to the room. "We are going to make 4 computers. That's it, only 4. If a project doesn't fit in one of these boxes, it is canceled." The room was silent. Engineers were crying. "But we worked on this printer for 2 years. "I don't care," Jobs said. "It's gone." He slashed 70% of the projects. He fired 3,000 people. He killed the Newton, the iPad ancestor. He literally threw it in the trash. He killed the clone program, allowing other companies to make Macs. He focused the entire company on just 4 products. Focus. He remembered Marcula's philosophy. Deciding what not to do is as important as deciding what to do. But cutting products wasn't enough. The employees were depressed. The world thought Apple was a loser. Jobs needed to fix the soul of the company. He called the advertising agency, TBW Achiat Day. He called Lee Clow, the man who made the 1984 commercial. Jobs said, "Apple has forgotten who it is. We are not a computer box company. We are a lifestyle. We are for the rebels." They created a campaign. No computers, no specs, no prices, just black and white photos of geniuses. Einstein, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Picasso, Amelia Earhart, and 2 words, think different. Grammatically, it should be think differently, but Jobs wanted different to be a noun, like think victory. Jobs wrote the script himself. He poured his own pain into it. You know the words. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes. He narrated the first version himself. It was beautiful. But at the last minute, he decided not to use his voice. If I use my voice, people will think it's about me. It needs to be about Apple. He hired actor Richard Dreyfuss to read it. The ad aired. It didn't sell a single computer, but it made the Apple employees proud again. They wore the t-shirts. They put up the posters. Jobs had fixed the bank account. He had fixed the soul. Now, he needed a product. He needed to fill that first box on the grid, consumer desktop. Jobs walked through the Apple Design Lab. It was depressing. The designers were designing gray, boring boxes because the old CEOs told them to. But in a corner, Jobs saw a young British man. He was quiet. He was shy. He had a shaved head. His name was Jony Ive. Jony was packing his boxes. He was about to quit. He hated the corporate culture. Jobs looked at Jony's sketches. They weren't boxes. They were curves. They were friendly. Jobs felt a spark, a connection. They went to lunch. And they realized they were soulmates. They both believed that design wasn't just how it looked. It was how it worked. Jobs told Jony, "Don't quit. We are going to build the future together." This was the start of the Jobs and Ive era, the most productive partnership in industrial design history. They started working on the new computer. The code name was Columbus, because it would discover a new world. Jobs said, "I want a computer that looks like it arrived from another planet, a happy planet." At the time, all computers were beige, a dirty yellow-white color. Jony Ive said, "Let's make it translucent. Let's make it see-through." He visited a candy factory. He studied how light passed through gumdrops. They chose a color, a deep blue-green. They called it Bondi Blue, named after the water at Bondi Beach in Australia. And the shape, it was an egg, a teardrop. No separate tower, no separate monitor. Everything in one box. The iMac. The I stood for Internet, but also for individual, instruct, inform, inspire. But then Jony Ive did something weird. He put a handle on the top of the computer. The engineers went crazy. "Why?" they screamed. "It is a desktop computer. It weighs 20 pounds. Nobody is going to carry it around. The handle costs $2 extra." Jobs looked at the handle. He smiled. He explained the psychology. "People are scared of technology," he said. "Computers look like cold machines. If it has a handle, it implies that you can touch it. It makes it approachable. Even if you never carry it, the handle says, 'I am friendly.' The handle stayed." But Jobs made another decision, a controversial one. He killed the floppy disk. Every computer had a floppy drive. It was the standard. Jobs said, "No, it's old. It's dead. We're using CD-ROM and the internet." The tech press mocked him. "The iMac is doomed. How will people save files?" Jobs said. "They will email them." He was right. He pushed the world forward by cutting the past. May 1998, the launch. Jobs walks on stage. He unveils the iMac G3. The audience gasps. It glows. It looks like a piece of candy. "The back of our computer looks better than the front of the other guys." Jobs bragged. It cost $299. It was a smash hit. People bought it just for the way it looked. It was the first computer that people put in their living rooms, not their offices. It saved Apple. Apple went from losing $1 billion to making a profit of $300 million. The crisis was over. The pirate flag was flying again. But Jobs wasn't satisfied. He looked at the iMac. It was great for the internet. But he noticed something new happening. Napster, MP3s. Kids were downloading music. They were burning CDs. The Mac couldn't burn CDs easily. Jobs was furious. "We missed the boat," he yelled. "We looked like idiots." He realized that the computer was changing. It wasn't just for spreadsheets anymore. It was a digital hub for your lifestyle, your photos, your movies, your music. He ordered his team to build the best music software in the world. They bought a small app called SoundJam MP. They redesigned it, simplified it, they renamed it iTunes. January 2001. iTunes is launched. Rip, mix, burn. It was great, but there was a problem. Portable MP3 players sucked. They were big, they were ugly. They held 10 songs. The interface was terrible. Jobs looked at them and said, "These are crap." He turned to his hardware chief, John Rubinstein. He said, "Build me a music player, but not just a player. I want my entire music library in my pocket." Rubinstein went to Toshiba in Japan. He found a tiny secret hard drive, the size of a coin, 5 gigabytes. Toshiba didn't know what to do with it. Rubinstein bought all of them, every single one. He went back to Jobs. "I have the drive. We can put 1,000 songs on this." 1,000 songs. Most players held 15. Jobs' eyes lit up. He called Joni Ive. "Joni," he said, "design a box for this, and make it pure white." White? Electronics were always black or gray. "No," Jobs said, "pure, white, like a spaceship." And the interface? Jobs hated buttons. "I don't want to press a button 1,000 times to get to the song Z." Phil Schiller, the marketing VP, had an idea. "What about a wheel?" You spin the wheel. The list scrolls fast. The click wheel. It was genius. The pieces were coming together. The device that would change music forever was born. But it needed a name. A freelance copywriter looked at the white prototype. It reminded him of the white pods in the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey. Open the pod bay doors, HAL pod, iPod. The year is 2001. The iPod is out, it is cool. But there is a problem. To get music on it, you have to be a pirate. You have to use Napster or LimeWire. It is slow. It is illegal. The songs have weird names like track_01_Lincoln_Park_remix.mp3. Steve Jobs looked at this mess. He saw an opportunity. He said people want to buy music. They just want it to be easy. He decided to build a store, the iTunes Store. But to do that, he needed the music. He needed the rights. He had to convince the big 5 record labels, Sony, Warner, Universal, BMG, EMI. These were old, grumpy men in suits. They hated technology. They thought the internet was the devil. Steve Jobs flew to New York. He walked into their boardrooms. He used his reality distortion field. He told them, "Napster is stealing your lunch. Your industry is dying. I am your only hope." He proposed a radical idea. "We will sell songs for 99 cents. And we will sell them as singles." The label screamed, "No, we sell albums for $15. If we sell singles, nobody will buy the bad songs on the album." Jobs stood firm. "Nobody wants your bad songs anyway. It's 99 cents or zero." One by one, they surrendered. They signed the deal. April 28, 2003, the iTunes Store launches. Jobs predicted they would sell 1 million songs in 6 months. They sold 1 million songs in 6 days. The industry was shocked. Apple became the biggest music retailer in the world. Bigger than Walmart. Bigger than Tower Records. And the iPod? It exploded. Jobs made a brilliant marketing decision. Every other music player had black headphones. Jobs said, "Make ours white." Why? Because the iPod was in your pocket. Nobody could see it. But the white earbuds? They were visible. They were a signal. If you saw someone on the bus with white cables, you knew. They have an iPod. They have 1,000 songs. They are cool. It was a status symbol, like a Rolex. Apple launched the Silhouette commercials, black shadows dancing against bright neon backgrounds, holding white iPods. Jet, U2, Coldplay, Eminem. Everyone wanted to be in an Apple ad. The iPod became 50% of Apple's revenue. Steve Jobs was the king of the world, but Jobs was paranoid. He was a visionary, and visionaries see threats before anyone else. He looked at the cell phone market, Nokia, Motorola, BlackBerry. He realized something terrifying. Phones are getting smarter. They have cameras. Soon, they will have music players. If a phone can play music, nobody will carry an iPod in a phone. They will just carry the phone. The phone is going to kill the iPod. Most CEOs would try to protect their cash cow. Steve Jobs was different. He said, "If we don't cannibalize ourselves, someone else will." He decided to destroy the iPod by building a phone. He tried to partner first. He worked with Motorola to build the ROKR, the iTunes phone. It launched in 2005. It was garbage. It was slow. It could only hold 100 songs. Jobs stood on stage holding it. You could see the hate in his eyes. He looked like he wanted to throw it against the wall. He walked off stage and told his team, "I'm sick of dealing with these bozos. We are going to do it ourselves." He initiated Project Purple, the most secretive project in Silicon Valley history. He locked a team of engineers on a secure floor. They needed badges to get in. They couldn't tell their wives what they were working on. He pitted two teams against each other. Team A turned the iPod into a phone, put a dial on the click wheel. Team B used the experimental multi-touch screen. Team A was safer. Team B was science fiction. Jobs looked at the touchscreen. He used two fingers to zoom in on a photo. Pinched to zoom, he smiled. "This is it," he said. "This is magic." He chose the risk. He chose the iPhone. January 9th, 2007. The Moscone Center. San Francisco. The atmosphere is electric. Steve Jobs walks on stage. He is wearing his uniform. Black turtleneck, blue jeans, New Balance sneakers. He looks thin, but his eyes are burning. He starts speaking slowly. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. He pauses. Today, we are introducing 3 revolutionary products. The first is a widescreen iPod with touch controls. The crowd cheers. The second is a revolutionary mobile phone. The crowd screams. And the third is a breakthrough internet communicator. Silence. People are thinking. Jobs repeats it. An iPod. A phone. An internet communicator. An iPod. A phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone. Boom. The screen lights up. The iPhone appears. It has no keyboard. Just a giant screen. The competitors? BlackBerry, Microsoft laughed. Steve Ballmer of Microsoft said, $500? No keyboard? It will never sell to business people. They were dead wrong. But here is a secret. During that presentation, the iPhone was barely working. It was a prototype. It was held together with duct tape and prayers. If Jobs pressed the buttons in the wrong order, it would crash. If he opened the email before the browser, it would crash. The engineers were sitting in the audience, drinking whiskey from a flask, praying to the tech gods. But Jobs, the master showman, pulled it off. He swiped his finger across the screen. "Slide to unlock." The crowd gasped. It was so simple, so fluid. That day changed the world. We stopped looking up. We started looking down. The iPhone killed Nokia. It killed BlackBerry. It killed the standalone camera. It killed the GPS. It killed the iPod. It made Apple the most valuable company on earth. But while Apple was rising, Steve Jobs was fading. He had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2003. He tried to treat it with fruit diets and acupuncture. He delayed surgery. By the time he got surgery, it was too late. He kept working. He launched the iPad in 2010. He looked frail. His voice was weak, but his mind was sharp as a razor. August 24th, 2011, he writes a letter to the board. "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." He resigned. He named Tim Cook as the new CEO. Tim Cook, the supply chain genius, the calm, boring, efficient man, the opposite of Jobs. People said Apple is doomed. Without the visionary, they are nothing. October 5th, 2011. Steve Jobs passes away at his home in Palo Alto. He was 56 years old. The world mourned him differently than any other CEO. People didn't just write articles. They went to Apple stores. They lit candles. They left apples with bites taken out of them. They left sticky notes saying, "Thank you." They cried for a man who sold them phones. Why? Because he didn't just sell phones. He sold the idea that technology could be beautiful. He sold the idea that a tool could be an extension of the human soul. He was a tyrant. He was cruel. He was a bad father. He parked in handicapped spots. But he was also the greatest artist of the industrial age. Today, Apple is worth $3 trillion. Tim Cook steered the ship to unimaginable heights. The Apple Watch, the AirPods, the Vision Pro, Critics say Apple isn't innovative anymore, they just refine things. Maybe. But look at the DNA. Walk into an Apple store today. Look at the tables. Look at the glass. Look at the box your iPhone comes in. The way it slides open slowly. The whoosh effect. That is Steve Jobs. He is still there. In every curve, in every pixel, in every no, he built a company that could survive without him. And that was his greatest invention of all. The boy who was abandoned. The hippie who didn't shower. The exile who was kicked out. The king who returned. Steve Jobs. The architect of desire. Good night.